My friend and I sat in the back seat, trying to appear relaxed, despite the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. Our driver, a man who had seemed normal enough when we'd flagged him down, hadn't said a word since we got in. As we neared our exit, I broke the silence. "You can drop us off here," I said, aiming for a casual tone. The man's eyes met mine in the mirror, and I saw something there that made me wish I'd kept quiet. A slow smile spread across his face. "Sure thing, where exactly do you live?" he replied, his voice low. The question sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, but before I could come up with a vague answer, my friend blurted out our address. I shot her a look, but it was too late. As we pulled up to our apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd made a mistake. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of an experience that would stay with me for decades. I was 18 when it happened, living with my best friend in a small apartment on the outskirts of town. We were adventurous back then, always looking for the next thrill. Hitchhiking was our favorite pastime, a risky habit we couldn't seem to kick despite the obvious dangers. We thought we were invincible, as most teenagers do. How wrong we were. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when everything changed. My friend had gone out, leaving me alone in the apartment. I decided to take a nap, retreating to my bedroom at the back of the house. I'm not sure how long I slept, but when I opened my eyes, the room was bathed in the warm light of late afternoon. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then, I saw him. A figure stood in my doorway, silhouetted against the light from the hallway. My heart skipped a beat as recognition dawned. It was the man who had given us a ride a few weeks ago, the one we had carelessly allowed to drop us off at our apartment. He just stood there, watching me, his expression unreadable in the shadows. Every instinct told me to panic, to scream, to run, but somehow, I knew that would be a mistake. In that moment, I made a decision that I believe changed everything. I sat up slowly, forcing a smile as if finding a stranger in my bedroom was perfectly normal. "Oh, hey there," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "What a surprise. Let's go to the living room, shall we?" As I led him to the front of the house, chatting as if we were old friends, my mind raced. How did he get in? What did he want? And most importantly, how was I going to get out of this situation alive? As we entered the living room, I felt like an actress stepping onto a stage, playing a role I hadn't rehearsed. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it, but I kept my face neutral, even friendly. "So, what brings you by?" I asked, gesturing for him to take a seat while I remained standing. I wanted to keep the upper hand, to be ready to move if I needed to. He sat down, his eyes never leaving me. "I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd check in on you girls. Just see how you're doing," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. I forced a laugh, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's so thoughtful of you. We're doing great. Thanks for asking." I could see his eyes darting around the room, taking in every detail. I knew I needed to get him out of there, and fast, but I also knew that showing any sign of fear or discomfort could be dangerous. Predators, I'd learned, often feed on fear. So I kept talking, asking him about his day to keep the conversation going, while I figured out my next move. I also made sure to mention my roommate, implying that she'd be home any minute. It was a lie, but I hoped it might deter him from trying anything. The minutes ticked by like hours. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he stood up. "Well, I should get going. It was nice seeing you again," he said, his eyes lingering on me in a way that made my skin crawl. I walked him to the door, my heart in my throat. As he stepped outside, he turned back to me. "I'll be seeing you around," he said, and it sounded more like a promise than a goodbye. My roommate was shocked when I told her what had happened. "We need to call the police," she insisted, but I hesitated. Instead, we took matters into our own hands. We changed the locks, installed a security system, and made a pact to never hitchhike again. I thought I was lucky when a family man and his young nephew pulled over to give me a ride. The first hour flew by pleasantly, with easy conversation and the comforting presence of a child in the car. But as we entered the second hour, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The man's questions became increasingly personal, his tone morphing from friendly to menacing. My fingers tightened around the switchblade hidden in my sleeve, a precaution I'd hoped never to need. Then came the moment I realized I was in real danger. His cheerful smile never wavering, he casually mentioned he expected a favor in exchange for the ride, not just for himself, but for his 13-year-old nephew too. At the time, I was a young, carefree spirit, splitting my time between Montana and British Columbia, where my boyfriend lived. We were perpetually broke and careless, relying on the generosity of strangers to get us from point A to point B. As August drew to a close, it was time for me to head back to school. With no money for a bus ticket and parents who were less than pleased with my lifestyle choices, I found myself with only one option: to hitchhike alone for the first time. The thought was daunting, but I was already 2 days late for school and running out of alternatives. I packed my backpack, double-checking for my ID, and hit the road. To my surprise, the journey started smoothly. An elderly couple whisked me from the mountain town to Creston, near the border crossing. After walking across, I was quickly picked up by a man who, despite initially giving me the creeps, turned out to be harmless. He lectured me about the dangers of hitchhiking alone before dropping me off in Coeur d'Alene, nearly halfway to my destination. My luck seemed almost too good to be true. Little did I know, it was about to run out in the most unsettling way. Standing just outside Coeur d'Alene city limits, I stuck out my thumb once again. 1 hour passed, then 2. The sun beat down relentlessly as I walked slowly along the highway, hoping for a ride. In a stroke of what I thought was luck, I found a small piece of cardboard, perfect for making a sign to catch drivers' attention. As I walked, something caught my eye. A thin, dark snake, about 2 feet long, was struggling to climb over the concrete guardrail. Without much thought, I used my newfound cardboard to help it over. In retrospect, I should have recognized this as the omen it was. Before I could reach the next exit, a car slowed to a stop beside me. My heart did its usual nervous dance as I approached, trying to gauge whether I was about to meet a good Samaritan or my doom. Inside was a man, probably in his late 30s, and a boy who looked to be around 10 to 13 years old. The man introduced the boy as his nephew and explained they were heading back to St. Louis after visiting family in Seattle. Relief washed over me. Surely, I thought, a man wouldn't try anything nefarious with a child in tow. How naive I was. I climbed into the back seat. My boyfriend's switchblade nestled in my palm, hidden up my sleeve, a precaution that would soon prove necessary. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. The man chatted amicably about his family, while the boy remained mostly silent. I began to relax, thinking I'd lucked out once again. But as we entered the second hour of our journey, the conversation took an unsettling turn. The man's questions became increasingly personal and raunchy. He asked about my boyfriend, our intimate life, and our favorite positions. My stomach churned as I realized the gravity of my situation. Panic rose in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. I played along with his conversation, buying time as I desperately tried to formulate an escape plan. The smell of alcohol on his breath grew stronger as the miles ticked by, his inhibitions clearly fading with each sip from his soda cup. Then came the moment that chilled me to my core. He made it clear that he expected sexual favors in exchange for the ride, not just from me, but he asked me to get a friend of mine to give favors for his nephew as well. His cheerful yet menacing smile made my blood run cold. We were about 20 minutes from my town when inspiration struck. I plastered on my best flirtatious smile and told him I had the perfect friend in mind. As we approached my exit, I suggested we stop for beer before meeting her. As we pulled into the gas station, my heart was racing. This was my chance, perhaps my only chance, to escape this increasingly dangerous situation. I directed him to a store just a few blocks from where I lived, knowing the layout would work to my advantage. When he reluctantly went inside to buy beer, which I knew was stored at the back of the shop, I seized my moment. With trembling hands, I quietly opened the car door and bolted. My feet barely touched the ground as I sprinted down the alley, adrenaline coursing through my veins. About a block away, I spotted a large clump of bushes. Without hesitation, I dove in, leaves and twigs scratching my skin as I burrowed as deep as I could. I folded myself into the tightest ball possible, my knife now out of my sleeve and clutched in my white-knuckled grip. Time seemed to stand still as I huddled in those bushes. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give away my location. I could hear him yelling for me in the distance, his voice thick with anger. Each shout sent a fresh wave of fear through me. When I had arrived at the gas station, it was about 4 p.m. I stayed in those bushes until night fell, terrified he might find me if I moved. Only when true darkness enveloped the town did I finally find the courage to move. With shaking legs, I emerged from my leafy hideout and made a final sprint for home. I burst through my front door, immediately locking the deadbolt behind me. That day marked the end of my hitchhiking adventures. I realized how lucky I had been, not just to escape this particular situation, but to have survived all my previous hitchhiking experiences unscathed. I couldn't believe my eyes. There he was, just a few feet away, the same man who only a month ago had nearly turned my hitchhiking adventure into a nightmare. I froze, desperately hoping he wouldn't notice me, but luck wasn't on my side. His eyes scanned the room and suddenly locked onto mine. He put down his drink and started making his way towards me. Let me take you back to where it all began. It was a different time. An era when hitchhiking wasn't considered as dangerous as it is today. I found myself at this crazy bar by the lake, known for its insane drink specials. 3 pony bottles for just $1. As you could imagine, things got pretty wild. After a long night of cheap booze and questionable decisions, I decided it was time to head home. In my inebriated state, hitchhiking seemed like a perfectly reasonable option. I know, not the smartest move. It wasn't long before a car pulled over. 2 guys, seemingly friendly enough, offered me a ride. They were heading my way, so I hopped in without a second thought. For the first half hour or so, everything was cool. We chatted, laughed, and I was feeling pretty good about my luck. But then, things took a dark turn. The driver's tone shifted, and he started talking about something that made my skin crawl. At first, I thought he was just making a dark joke when he casually mentioned using a bat on me. I even forced out a nervous laugh, trying to play along, but as he continued, the smile faded from my face. His voice took on a chillingly serious edge as he described, in vivid detail, what he planned to do to me. The casual conversation had morphed into something straight out of a horror movie. I noticed with growing dread that we were no longer on the route to my home. He had taken a turn onto a darker, less traveled road. As he spoke, his eyes met mine in the rearview mirror, and what I saw there sent ice through my veins. There wasn't a hint of humor or playfulness, only a cold, determined look that told me he was deadly serious. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I knew I had to get out of that car, and fast. As we approached a red light, I saw my chance. Without a moment of hesitation, I flung the door open and bolted. I ran like I'd never run before, fueled by pure survival instinct. Once I felt I was a safe distance away, something snapped inside me. All the fear and anger transformed into a burst of defiant energy. I started picking up rocks from the roadside and hurling them at the car and the driver. It was reckless, sure, but at that moment, it felt like sweet revenge. They finally drove off, leaving me alone on the dark road. Somehow, I managed to make it home that night, shaken but alive. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. About a month after that harrowing night, I was at a different bar, trying to put the whole incident behind me. That's what I spotted him, not the passenger, but the driver himself. The man who had terrorized me that night was now just a few feet away, casually enjoying a drink. My first instinct was to run, but something kept me rooted to the spot. Before I could decide what to do, he noticed me. Our eyes met, and I braced myself for the worst. But to my surprise, he approached me with an expression of what seemed like remorse. He began apologizing profusely, his words tumbling out in a rush. The story he told me was as unexpected as it was disturbing. Both he and his friend had been tripping on acid that night. In his drug-induced state, he had decided he wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. As I stood there, listening to his explanation and apology, the realization of how close I'd come to being a casualty of his drug-induced curiosity made my blood run cold. My mind raced with horrifying what-ifs. What if I hadn't jumped out at that red light? What if their acid-warped minds had pushed them just a little further? I could almost feel the phantom pain of a bat crushing my skull. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the quiet afternoon, startling me from my thoughts. I hesitated before answering, an inexplicable sense of unease washing over me. As soon as I heard the voice on the other end, my blood ran cold. It was him, the hitchhiker I'd picked up just a week ago. His tone was urgent, as he insisted I listened carefully. What he said next left me frozen in place. I was in my mid-20s, full of optimism and always eager to lend a helping hand. That fateful day began like any other, with me embarking on my usual 2-hour drive into the city. About an hour into my journey, I spotted a lone figure on the roadside, arm outstretched in the universal hitchhiker's gesture. Without hesitation, I pulled over and offered him a ride. The man seemed polite, even a bit shy, as he accepted my offer and settled into the passenger seat. As we drove, we fell into easy conversation. We discussed our lives, current events, and everything in between. I found myself genuinely enjoying his company, feeling a connection with this stranger I'd picked up on the side of the road. When we reached the midway point of our journey, I decided to treat him to dinner at the pit stop. He seemed flustered by my offer, especially after mentioning his financial struggles earlier, but eventually accepted with gratitude. The rest of the trip passed quickly, and soon we were in the heart of the city. As I dropped him off, he thanked me profusely for the ride and the meal. Just before leaving, he asked for my phone number, suggesting we might catch up someday. Thrilled at the prospect of a new friendship, I happily provided my number and watched him disappear into the bustling city streets, not knowing his true intentions behind asking for my number. A week passed, and I had almost forgotten about my hitchhiking companion when the phone rang. It was him, but something in his voice immediately set me on edge. He launched into a monologue, not allowing me to interject. His words left me stunned and shaken to my core. He confessed that when he first got into my car, he had harbored sinister intentions. He had planned to harm me at the pit stop, steal my car, and leave me for dead. But my kindness, he said, had changed everything. The way I had treated him with genuine warmth and compassion had made it impossible for him to go through with his plan. He couldn't bear the thought of hurting someone who had shown him such kindness. Before I could respond, he made me promise never to pick up another hitchhiker. His voice was pleading, insistent. Then, abruptly, the line went dead. When I tried to call back, I discovered it was a payphone number. That call shook me to my core, making me question everything: my judgment, my safety, and the very nature of kindness itself. I've spent years turning that day over in my mind, wondering what might have happened if I hadn't been kind, or if I had picked up someone else instead.